Hello, Jet Setters. I'm Jeb Brooks from greenergrass.com. I am on with two of my very favorite aviation celebrities. That's Dennis Bunnik, wave Dennis, and Paul Stewart. And we're talking aviation. Let's get into it.
We're not talking into aviation. We're talking rubbish. Like we've
Oh.
we've been dribbling for a few episodes now, and I don't think we should make any promises we can't keep. So
It's rubbish.
It is rubbish. But if you like rubbish,
We're your
then
guy.
this is your place. We'd love a bit of aviation. What's the main theme and topics for this episode?
We are talking all things aviation security. There's been so much talk about COVID and all that, and keeping airplanes clean. But let's talk about security and safety in aviation on a more broad level. Let's get into it. What do you say? Hey, look, here, I will introduce Paul because he's a little too humble. Paul is YouTube's funniest trip reporter. Truly genius when it comes to inserting humor into the aviation experience. So no pressure, Paul, but you better make us laugh this go around.
So, Paul, tell us, how did you get into this whole av geekery and YouTube?
So a number of years ago, I just took my camera along on a flight, and I was just filming the landing and takeoff. And then I uploaded them onto YouTube. My first ever video was a takeoff on a Qantas 767 from Sydney. The footage was horrific. Most of it was my leg and the wall and the roof. Some of it was the engine and the wing outside. And then after a while, I went back to the video and realized some people were watching it and commenting on it and liked it. Then I got the travel bug a few years later, and then I was just taking photos. Again, most of the video was takeoffs and landings with a few still photos of the seat and the food. They were really bad videos, and I've since deleted most of them. But a lot of people commented on them, people liked them, and then gradually over a number of years, I've just sort of refined techniques, and then I've just stumbled across this whole type of thing. So it's been a fun hobby to have on the side.
Fantastic. And outside of taking photos and stalking aircraft, what do you do?
So I'm a doctor, and I work in mental health in the public healthcare system here in Australia.
I think one of the great things about Paul is he balances out the two of us there, Dennis, because Paul understands and is a true aviation enthusiast in that he knows, there are those like hair dryer things that hang off the wings. Like he can tell us what they are. So I think that he'll bring a welcome balance to our ability to sit in a chair and talk about what the chair feels like when we sit in it.
Sounds good to me. So put your seatbelts on, seats in the upright position, tray tables securely fastened, and make sure that your liquids are less than 100 ml, and let's get started.
And turn off those cell phones, because if you don't, something bad could happen.
Well, yes, but will it? Okay, so here's the first question. Because there was, right in the early piece, I remember a story coming out of New Zealand where a government minister did a telephone interview with a radio whilst up in the air, and that caused a bit of controversy. They thought, that might be dangerous, and after that, people weren't allowed to use their phones.
See, you know what I think it is? Well, we should defer to our technical expert.
Yes.
No, it's been shown on Mythbusters. It doesn't really matter.
Hold on.
I think it's mostly, to be honest, I think it's mostly a concentration thing. The crews want passengers to be concentrating during safety briefings. But I still remember hearing a story where I suppose I shouldn't say the airline, but it begins with a J and rhymes with Pet Star. They actually had to do a missed approach because once they got down low enough, one of the captains or pilots' phones came into reception, and then he got barraged with a whole lot of messages. So obviously his phone wasn't in flight mode. Asked them they had to do a missed approach and land and come in and land again. So I don't think, from a technical electronic perspective, it doesn't really interfere with modern aircraft.
I want to clarify too, just to make sure we don't brush past this. This is such a professional podcast that our technical consultant, our technical expert, relies on Mythbusters to answer your technical questions.
It's a good program.
Question from Marty McFly, who asked, in your travels, have you ever worked out who the Sky Marshal is?
Yes. So I had the chance to travel with a friend of mine who is a pilot, back and forth to Europe, do the travel the way the pilot did. I made a video about this, and so he indicated to me that there were air marshals on our flight, and he challenged me to work out who they were. And on the way over, I couldn't tell, but again, so I went over. We had 24 hours in Europe, and then came right back. Well, there was a guy. There was only one other person who was not a crew member in business class who had been on my flight and had 24 hours in Europe. I was like, that has to be the guy, right? And what was interesting to me about that is they've got the same schedule as the pilots, and in fact, sometimes they'll hang out with the pilots on their 24 hours because they get to know each other, right?
Yeah.
So you talk about a really tough job, because these are people who take the flights the same way that the crew does. They're not really able to wear headphones or watch TV. They can read a magazine. They've got to be paying attention and sitting on an aisle, so they wouldn't, if there's something cool going out the window, they're not looking at it. But it really struck me just what a difficult job that is, what a tough schedule it's got to be to have that job. So I'm certainly grateful that they're in the air for us, but wouldn't want to do that job.
So they're not even allowed to wear the in-flight PJs.
Well, remember, these, at least in my experience, these are U.S. Air Marshals, and they're flying U.S. Airlines, which sure as heck do not have pajamas.
United Airlines, in their Polaris business class, if you ask for PJs, they will give them to you.
You are correct. I stand corrected. Delta doesn't need to provide pajamas. That's
why they're the friendly skies. That's them, isn't it? That is United, isn't it?
Fly the friendly skies.
Yeah. So that would be the number one reason why I would never be a Sky Marshal, because I wouldn't be able to wear the in-flight PJs. The fact that I don't know how to handle a gun, I'm probably far too old. And I'm assuming there's probably laws against them drinking as well, rules against them drinking too.
I was going to say number one would be the gin and tonic. No gin and tonics.
That doesn't sound like a fun job at all.
Also, I don't think they're allowed to make YouTube videos about their flights.
Right, that does it. I'm definitely not Sky Marshalling anytime soon. What about you, Paul? Have you had any Sky Marshals?
So my contractual obligations obligate me to make no comment about being a Sky Marshal. And I'm definitely not one.
This is... Oh, man, this is big news. Breaking news here on Two Guys Talking Rubbish.
I haven't seen any Sky Marshals, but except for... Royal Jordanian, and I'm not sure whether they still do it, but they used to have basically a bloke that looks like security Secret Service hanging around in the front galley, and he would basically spend most of the flight sitting in the crew seat looking back at the passengers. So if you were in the first couple of rows, especially in an aisle seat, basically this guy'd be making eye contact with you regularly. It was very disconcerting.
So I did have an interesting experience flying LL, the Israeli airline. It's slightly off topic. So as you may know, they're obviously very careful about security. So before you board the flight, they interview every single passenger individually. So I was there with my father.
Once a doctor, always a doctor.
in Hong Kong, flying over to Tel Aviv. So they were asking us questions, and my dad is just friendly, but I think just put on the spot, just became briefly thought disordered and appeared very anxious. So then they split us up. This is one of my first trips overseas. It's quite a number of years ago, so I was reasonably nervous anyway. So they split us up, and then we never saw each other again. The plane's boarding, everyone else is on board. They're about to close boarding. I'm sitting right at the gate. I haven't seen him. And then I just figured, well, I need to get onto the plane. I'm the last person on board. Then I get on board, and then I find he's actually somehow already got on there. But essentially, they took him away and to ask him a whole lot of questions because I thought he was suspicious. I was fine. But so that was a reasonably exciting first experience flying LL. But certainly I did notice that a lot of the flight attendants were very large, like a lot of strong, muscular guys. And I did read afterwards that they actually do get sort of Defense Force people to work as flight attendants with that airline. So I thought that was very interesting and stressful at times.
Yeah, some of the Chinese carriers as well, I believe they have martial arts training.
Yeah, I was going to mention that. I've flown a couple of Chinese carriers, and there's been in each case an announcement made at the front end of the flight. In addition to the put your seatbelt on and here's how the oxygen mask works. It's sort of a security announcement that if anybody misbehaves, I'm the security officer on the flight, and it doesn't end well for you. So just stay calm.
Yes. Yeah. I saw that same. That certainly encouraged me to behave.
Because you don't normally.
Yeah. Have you guys ever seen a passenger go berserk on a plane? No, me either. What about flying nervousness? You talk about being a bit nervous for first overseas trip. What about fear of flying? Have you guys ever had the fear of flying? Because obviously that's a question we get as well. Do you get fear of flying, and how do you get over it, or how do you?
That was one thing that actually really got me into flying initially. I was quite fearful of flying. Then I moved away interstate to go to university, so I had to fly back and see my parents quite regularly. I used to be anxious for days leading up to flights. So one of the ways I managed that was essentially just to fly a lot. So we flew with Jetstar, so there's a lot of cheap fares between Sydney and Melbourne. So I actually just would fly up and down there quite regularly. And then with time, you feel you no longer have, I guess, those worries that you used to. It's essentially clinically we call it exposure therapy, where you expose yourself to what stresses you out. The first few times you do get stressed out, you get very anxious, your heart's racing, things like that. But then after a while, your body realizes there's actually nothing to fear. And then you're fine. So within just a number of years, I went from 2 flights a year, which I was terrified about, to do like 20, 30, 40, 50 flights. And I thoroughly enjoy all of them. If anything, I actually kind of enjoy turbulence now. It's kind of fun. So I used to be very, very fearful. I'm quite sympathetic to people that used to be.
So exposure therapy.
Yeah.
Sorry, exposure therapy. What is so that is, if you're scared of something, you should expose yourself to it?
In a reasonably contained environment, to an extent, because the whole idea is your panic response is the primitive part of your brain misfiring. So it thinks there's a lion about to jump out at you, but it's not. So it's preparing you to run away, but you don't need to. So eventually you expose yourself to whatever that is. And then after a while, your primitive part of your brain realizes, actually, I don't have anything to fear. There's nothing scary about flying. It's perfectly safe. Then you no longer get those panic symptoms that you used to have at the start. But it works quite well. There's a lot of science to back it up.
Well, it's interesting you talk about that, because there really is very little to fear when it comes to flying. It's a remarkably safe mode of transport. It's the old adage that it's more dangerous to drive to the airport than it is to be on the plane. But I think you raise a good point, Dennis, with the question, which is we often get comments on videos or emails or that kind of thing from people who are afraid of flying. And one of the nice things we hear sometimes is that people use our videos to kind of have a modified version of, to borrow your term, Paul, exposure therapy, to see, okay, this is okay. But it's a very real fear that people feel when it comes to flying.
Yes, yeah. And I think on that, I think our videos have also been used to aid sleep and cure insomnia. I've
heard that. And Nikita's friends have told me they've started using it to save money. They don't need to give people anesthetics. They just have us talking rubbish.
It's really just Dennis's narration.
I got over my fear of public speaking by taking on a teaching role at one stage.
What did you teach?
I taught Financial management and marketing to tourism students, to tourism management students, first year students. So I'm a qualified chartered management accountant and have a fair bit of experience in marketing. So when I moved back from London, I then went to lecture. So as a guest lecturer at, I did it for 2 or 3 years, at the School of Tourism here in Adelaide, that I had only graduated from 3 years earlier. So here I was standing in front of the classroom as a very nervous public speaker, needing to conduct a 3-hour lecture.
Wow.
Cured me. Those, I don't think those students learnt anything in the first, few lessons, but.
And that's why to this day, you're comfortable walking through a public airport with, for those of you who don't know, Dennis uses a camera that's basically like a television camera for his videos. So he's walking through with this massive camera. This explains so much.
Well, exactly. So this is my natural state when walking through an airport. So shyness is goes away in that respect. So
bring it back real quick to this question of aviation safety, especially fear of flying. That kind of thing. Paul, you mentioned something really interesting. You said you kind of enjoy turbulence now. So from somebody who was afraid of flying to somebody who enjoys, can you talk about enjoying turbulence? What does that mean?
I think it's in part just it sort of challenges the fears that I used to have. So in a weird kind of way, there's a part of me that is actually somewhat proud that I did actually work through that, because the actual initial exposure, the first few flights on that Jetstar A320 was actually pretty scary. So obviously the easy thing would have been to have canceled the flight, stay at home, but I pushed myself going through them. You feel uncomfortable. It's not a fun time, but with time, it ends up being much more acceptable. And then eventually you get to enjoy it. One thing which I actually did find quite helpful was on YouTube, there are videos of structural testing with aircraft. I think they actually get like a Boeing 777 and essentially stretch it to breaking point. And I think seeing how far that the wings actually bend up before they crack, I think for me was actually quite comforting, because often you look out the window during turbulence and see the engines bouncing around. Yeah. But actually seeing how much they can flex before they break is actually comforting. So now if I'm in sort of like a Dash 8 and I'm flying through clouds, coming to land in some regional airport or something like that, it's really enjoyable, because to me it highlights the fear that I used to have. And also I kind of picture myself, I'm in a go-kart. So it's actually kind of fun going through clouds and kind of getting thrown around.
Have you got yourself a t-shirt that says "Flying, I like it rough"?
No, but I think you've got a Christmas present coming for me.
Oh, I think, I think that'd be good. Do you like it? Do you like it rough, Jeb?
I do. I like turbulence as well. It's a reminder that you're flying. I kind of think of the what I'm paying for is the ability to go from Sydney to Melbourne. But the bonus is if there's some turbulence and I can really tell I'm flying. I like that a lot.
See, I like it smooth and gentle. I'm turbulence is okay, but if I sitting there with a nice drink or watching a movie or something or reading the paper, can look out the window, see some beautiful sights, I don't need the risk of my red wine or gin and tonic being spilt all over me. Nobody needs that stress.
So to that point, your Singapore Airlines first class flight in the double bed there, was that a smooth flight or was it rough?
That was like flying on a magic carpet.
It's good.
Yes, there was a bit of movement. There was a bit of rocking back and forth. It was a good experience.
It certainly looked like it.
You guys should try it.
Oh, it's on my list. Are you kidding me? Smooth, rough, I don't care. However Singapore does it, I'm there. I cannot let this pass. One of my So obviously, this community is wonderful because of the people that watch our videos, but also the connections we've made with each other. And one of my very favorite memories of that sort of aspect of this whole experience is Paul Stewart's visit to Washington, D.C., where we were standing in front of the Capitol. And I had just flown in on Alaska Airlines, so I was shooting like the conclusion to that, and then we were shooting the opening to what would have been your first 737 MAX flight, which of course got canceled because it was whatever. So you were trying to do
talking about fear of flying.
Yeah, whoops. You were trying to do an American accent, and Paul, I just want to. Do you remember what you said? This was you as an American. Do you remember the phrase you used?
Well, there were many things that I said, but then at the end, for reasons I don't know why, possibly because I assume this is how most Americans finish all conversations, I said "farewell, brothers." I don't know why. It just came out, and then it became a hashtag.
And now I've arrived in now I've arrived in Washington, D.C., and look who I've run into, my good friend Paul Stewart.
G'day, mate. I'm so glad to have enjoyed that flight from Seattle on through to DCA. Hope you did too. Leave a thumbs up, a comment, and between now and the next time, see you in the sky.
Farewell, brothers.
Yes, somehow every American in Paul's world, every American says goodbye by saying farewell, brothers.
Farewell, brothers.
I don't think I've ever heard anybody say farewell, brothers. I haven't spent a lot of time up in the Amish communities, but
it's an American thing, Dennis. Don't worry.
Okay, I don't want to be controversial, but which do you prefer, the A350 or the 787?
The A350 has prettier wingtips.
That is true. Yes.
But I think in all seriousness, I think from a comfort perspective, the reality is both planes, I think, are on par. I think obviously it's very dependent upon the actual airline and the seat they choose. But from a noise, vibration, harshness perspective, I think they're both quite similar. I do not like the electromagnetic windows in the 787 Dreamliner. I think the biggest issue is that crews sometimes lock them in a either fully dark or just there's a slight tint on it, and that tint wrecks your ability to get good photos. I think they're a good size. I think that's good. But the problem is though that they're able to darken them. The other thing is as well, they don't completely block the sunlight. And for someone who is a ginger, I can still get sunburnt.
Really? You can get sunburned on a plane?
Yeah.
Oh,
so after on the 15-hour flight back from Los Angeles to Melbourne a few years ago, I had a nice pink burnness on the side of my arm that was next to the window.
You better see, if you were American, you could have sued them for that.
I could have retired by now. I could buy my own 787.
I could not agree with you more, Paul. I think that, they are very similar. However, the window is what puts me over the edge on the 787. I had the experience of flying from Perth to London with Qantas and QF9, and the windows were dark the whole time, even though it was night. So it was very disconcerting. I'll take it a step further and say if there is a person who thinks that the 787 windows are of any value at all, this is a person I do not want to associate with. Loser.
And there are fighting words, young man.
I'm glad we're 10,000 miles apart.
The thing that I actually like about the 787 windows is that they have they allow you to see out even in the darker set. So if it's light outside and everybody's watching a movie and so daytime flight, everybody puts the window shades down. You know, you're to feel like a real prick if you're the one lifting it up and suddenly blinding everybody with this bright sunshine. The 787 allows you to lighten them up a little bit, still enjoy the ambience of the view enjoy the view while the ambience of the cabin is not disturbed. See, I'm very conscious of not making a nuisance of myself for my fellow passengers.
I'm an American. I don't have to think about that.
Yeah, who are other passengers?
Yeah, see? And
I kid.
He doesn't. I've seen him. all right, on a plane, and so he walks around like he owns the place, strutting around with his camera and stuff, and yeah.
Well, it's funny. We were talking about sort of aviation experience, and we started the episode talking about air marshals. And have you ever seen a passenger go berserk? And we all answered no, which means there's a chance we were the ones that went berserk.
No, I was fine. I didn't do anything. The magistrate agreed with me in the end.
There is the old saying here that if you look around and you can't see the dickhead,
you're the guy walking through economy in your in-flight pajamas.
Is there a selfie happening?
Yeah, there's a selfie happening, I think. I don't know how to get this in.
It's there.
Farewell, brothers.